Pain shot through his shoulder and leg. He struggled to get up, but the men were too strong. They laughed at his attempts and mocked him, their voices echoing across the desert. Just as things seemed hopeless, a sudden movement caught James's eye. From the brush nearby, a figure appeared, moving swiftly and silently. It was a young woman, her dark hair tied back, her clothes simple but practical for the desert. Beige. She carried a small bow in her hand, and her eyes were sharp and focused. James did not recognize her, but in that moment, she was his only hope. Without hesitation, the woman aimed her bow and released an arrow. It struck the ground near the outlaws, startling them. The men shouted and turned, but she moved again, faster than James could follow. Another arrow whistled through the air, and this one knocked a rifle from one of the men's hands. Chaos erupted among the attackers.
Using the confusion, the woman grabbed James's arm.
"Come on!" she shouted, her voice urgent but calm. James, still in pain, struggled to rise. She did not wait for him to catch up. She pulled him toward a narrow path through the rocks, a path he would never have noticed on his own. The outlaws shouted and chased after them, but the woman was too quick. She seemed to know the desert as if it were a part of her. They ran together for what felt like hours. James's legs ached, his shoulder burned, but he did not dare slow down. The woman led him to a small cave hidden among the rocks. Inside, the air was cooler, and the shadows offered some protection. James collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and grateful. "You're safe for now," she said, her voice softening. She knelt beside him and examined his shoulder. "It's not broken, but you need to rest."
"You were lucky I was nearby." James looked at her, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath.
"Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse.
"My name is Eileen," she replied.
"I live nearby with my people. I saw what was happening and knew I had to help." James tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat.
He was overwhelmed by gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, he finally managed. "You saved my life." Eileen smiled faintly, but there was seriousness in her eyes. "You don't owe me anything," she said, "but you need to promise me something." James frowned, curious despite his exhaustion. "Promise me that if you survive this, you will never forget what happened here today," she said, her tone firm. "And promise me you will be true to your word, no matter what."
James hesitated for a moment, then nodded.
"I promise," he said. His mind raced and he suddenly blurted out, "I promise I'll marry you. If I live through this, I will find you again, and I will keep that promise." Eileen's eyes widened slightly. She seemed both surprised and touched.
"That is a heavy promise," she said softly, "but I will remember it." For the next few hours, Eileen tended to James's wounds.
She cleaned the dirt and dust from his cuts, wrapped his shoulder with cloth, and gave him water from a small skin bottle she carried. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were thoughtful, full of quiet strength, breath. James listened, fascinated by her calmness, her knowledge of the desert, and her courage. He realized that he had never met anyone like her before. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange, James felt a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. He had survived the attack thanks to Eileen, and he had made a promise that seemed bigger than himself. He didn't know if he would ever see her again, but the memory of her bravery was etched into his mind. Eileen watched the sun dip below the horizon, her face calm and unreadable. "We should move before it gets too dark." she said. The outlaws may come back and there are dangers in the desert at night. James nodded. Though his body was sore, he trusted her completely. Together they moved out of the cave, navigating the rough terrain with care.
Island led him to a hidden trail that wound through the rocks and brush, a path that only someone familiar with the land could know.
Breath. She guided him slowly, helping him over steep drops and around thorny bushes. As they traveled, James tried to make conversation, but Island often replied with short, practical answers. Bet. Every so often, she would offer a small smile or a piece of advice that revealed her quiet wisdom.
He began to admire her more and more, not just for saving his life, but for the calm strength she carried in every step.
By the time they reached a safer location, far from the immediate danger, night had fallen. The stars shone brightly above, and the desert seemed peaceful once more. James sat down exhausted and looked at Aelin with deep gratitude.
I don't know how I can ever repay you,
he said.
Island shook her head. You don't need to repay me.
Just remember your promise. James nodded solemnly. I will, he said, and in that moment he meant it with all his heart. He knew that this encounter would change his life forever. That night, under the open sky, James thought about the promise he had made. It was more than words, it was a vow tied to his survival, to gratitude, and to the courage of the young Apache woman who had risked everything to save him. He knew that life in the West was unpredictable, full of danger and uncertainty, but he also knew that he had met someone extraordinary, someone who had left a mark on his soul. Island sat a few feet away, watching the stars, but her thoughts were her own. She had saved a man's life, and in doing so had created a bond that neither time nor distance could easily break. But she had accepted his promise, though she knew the world would not make it easy for them to be together. But for now, they were safe, and that was enough. As the desert night deepened, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the quiet promise of a future neither of them could fully see yet. But both James and Aelin knew that this night marked the beginning of a story that would stay with them forever. A story of courage, gratitude, and a promise made in the heart of the wild desert.
After the desert night, James and Island had to part ways.
The safety she had led him to could only last for so long. The land was vast, and the dangers of the Wild West were everywhere. Island knew she could not stay with James without risking her own life. She had her people to return to, and the desert was not forgiving to those who lingered too long. James, she said softly, you need to go back to your life now. The ranch, your work, that is your path. Breaths to follow. James's heart sank. He wanted to ask her to stay, to come with him, but he knew the desert had rules they could not ignore. I understand, he said reluctantly. But I swear, Island, I will keep my promise. I will find you again, no matter how long it takes. Island's eyes met his, dark and steady, and for a moment she allowed herself to hope. Then you must live, James. Survive and be strong. That is the only way this promise can ever mean anything. With a final nod, she turned and disappeared into the shadows of the desert, moving as silently as she had appeared. James watched her go, feeling a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and longing. For the first time in years, he realized that someone had looked at him not as a cowboy or an outsider, but as a person worth saving. Her courage and kindness had left a mark on him that he could not forget. James returned to his ranch, riding slowly and carefully. His body ached from the injuries sustained during the ambush, and his mind was heavy with thoughts of Aelin. He arrived to find his cattle in order and his ranch functioning, yet the events of the desert had changed something inside him. Life on the ranch was familiar and predictable, But the desert encounter had opened his eyes to a world beyond the fences and trails he knew so well. Days turned into weeks, and James continued his work as a cowboy. He rode the same trails, checked on the cattle, and helped neighbors when needed. But no matter how busy he kept himself, his thoughts often drifted back to the young Apache woman who had saved him. Bah! He remembered her quiet strength, the way she moved through the desert like it belonged to her, and the promise they had made.
Meanwhile, Island returned to her people.
Breaths. She lived among her tribe, learning and teaching the ways of survival in the harsh desert. She was respected for her bravery, but she also faced challenges. Life as a woman in her tribe demanded strength, patience, and wisdom. She learned to hunt, track, and care for the sick and injured, skills that would serve her well in the years ahead. Even as she immersed herself in her community, Aylin could not forget James. The memory of his gratitude, the fear in his eyes during the ambush, and the promise he had made stayed with her.
She knew the world would not make it easy for a cowboy and an Apache woman to be together. The boundaries between their lives were strict, shaped by prejudice and tradition.
Yet deep in her heart, she held on to hope that one day their paths would cross again. James, on his side, began to realize that his feelings for Aylin were more than gratitude. He admired her courage and independence, her ability to face danger without fear. He spoke of her rarely, fearing that others would not understand. The people of the town respected him for his hard work and bravery, but none knew of the young woman who had changed his life. He kept her memory secret, a quiet treasure that no one could take from him.
Years passed. The desert remained as wild and unforgiving as ever, but James grew stronger and more skilled in his work.
He became known as a reliable and fair cowboy, someone who could handle the challenges of ranch life with determination and calm. Yet no matter his successes, there was always a part of him waiting for Aylin, hoping that she might appear again, even if only in a fleeting moment. Aylin's life also continued to evolve. She became a healer and protector for her people, using her skills to help those in need. Her reputation grew, and others admired her for her wisdom and bravery.
Yet no matter how busy or important her work became, her thoughts occasionally drifted to the cowboy who had promised her a future.
She wondered if he had survived, if he still remembered her, and if their promise would ever be fulfilled. Time was not always kind. Both James and Aylin faced hardships that tested their strength. James endured harsh winters, cattle rustlers, and difficult neighbors. He experienced loss and disappointment, moments that made him question whether his promise to Aylin was realistic or even possible. Each night under the vast sky he thought of her, drawing strength from the memory of her courage and the vow he had made. Aylin faced prejudice from outsiders who did not understand her ways, as well as the everyday struggles of life in a desert environment. She learned to face challenges with patience and intelligence, becoming stronger and wiser with each passing year. Breaths. Yet, even in her success, there was a quiet longing for the cowboy who had once been a stranger and had become someone unforgettable. Letters and messages were not an option for them. The distance was too great, and the world between them too divided. All they could do was hope, trusting that the bond formed in that desert night had not been broken by time or circumstance. Each of them carried the memory like a flame, fragile but persistent, lighting the way through difficult days. As the years moved forward, James often rode alone across the trails of the desert, imagining that Aylin might appear in the distance, just as she had that fateful day.
He spoke her name in whispers when no one was around, a reminder to himself of the promise that bound them.
He became more thoughtful, more aware of the fragility of life, and more determined to honor the vow he had made, no matter what obstacles lay ahead.
Aylin, too, would often pause in her work to think of James. She remembered his confusion and fear during the attack, and the way he had immediately promised her his loyalty and love. She had seen men make promises in desperation before, but something in him had been different. His words had carried weight, And even in the silence of the desert years later, she could still feel their truth. Life moved on, but neither forgot. The promise remained a quiet, steady force in their hearts. It guided their decisions, strengthened their courage, and gave them hope in moments of difficulty. Both knew that the world might never make it easy for a cowboy and an Apache woman to be together, but they also knew that some bonds were stronger than time, stronger than distance, and stronger than fear. In those years apart, they each grew into the people they were meant to be. Brass. James became more than a cowboy. He became a man who understood loyalty, courage, and the power of a promise. Island became more than a rescuer. She became a woman who embodied strength, wisdom, and the resilience of her people. Yet beneath all their growth, the memory of that desert night, the arrows, the chase, and the vow remained alive. Though the years had separated them, the story of their meeting was far from over. The desert had tested them both, shaped them, and prepared them for a reunion that neither could yet imagine. And though they did not know it at the time, fate was quietly guiding them toward the moment when their paths would cross again, bringing the promise they had made to life. In a way neither could forget, James and Aylin had begun a journey without knowing its end. The wild, untamed land had thrown them together in danger and separated them in peace. Yet the courage, hope, and loyalty they had shared that day had set the stage for a story that would last far beyond the desert trails. Both had learned the value of strength, patience, and trust, and each step they took in their separate lives carried the quiet, unwavering power of a promise made under the Arizona sun. Years passed, and the lives of James and Aylin moved on in separate directions, yet neither ever truly forgot the other. James had grown into a man of quiet respect in his town. He was known for his hard work, fairness, and courage. Cowboys and neighbors admired him, but none could see the part of him that was reserved for someone far away, someone who had saved his life and captured his heart. Every morning he woke with the memory of Aylin in his mind. Every night he went to sleep with her image in his thoughts. The desert encounter that had once been terrifying now seemed almost magical in his memory, as if it had been a turning point not just for his body but for his soul. Life on the ranch kept him busy, yet it was never enough to fill the emptiness he sometimes felt. He rode the trails alone, checked on cattle, fixed fences, and helped neighbors in need. But even when surrounded by people, his mind drifted back to Aylin. Cowboy promised he'd marry the Apache girl who saved him. Years later, she returned for him. The sun was high over the Arizona desert, beating down on the dry, dusty land.
The air shimmered in waves of heat, and the tall, golden grass seemed to sway lazily in the wind.
James, a young cowboy, rode steadily across the plain. He was strong, with broad shoulders and a determined look in his eyes, but even he could not ignore the harshness of the land. He had been traveling alone for days, guiding a small herd of cattle across the desert. The trail was long, and the work was tiring, but James was used to it. He glances around in despair to such a passing. As passing, he said, Chester. The desert seemed empty, but he knew better. He had heard stories from other cowboys, stories of bandits, outlaws, and hostile encounters with men who wanted nothing more than to take what was not theirs. James had learned to trust his instincts. He kept his hand close to the handle of his rifle, listening to every sound, the whisper of wind through the grass, the distant call of a hawk, the crunch of his horse's hooves on the dry earth. Without warning, a shadow fell across the trail. James froze, sensing danger before he could see it clearly. From behind the rocks and low shrubs, a group of men appeared. Their faces were rough, with scars and hard eyes. They were armed, and they moved quickly, surrounding him on all sides. The outlaws were after the cattle, but they had also spotted an easy target in James. "Hold it right there!" one of the men shouted. his voice rough and full of menace. James's heart pounded. He knew he was outnumbered, and there was little chance of escaping. The men closed in, circling him like wolves. James tried to speak, to reason with them, but the men did not care. One of them lunged forward, grabbing the reins of his horse. In the scuffle, James was thrown to the ground. He remembered her calm courage, the way she had moved through the desert with certainty, and the way her eyes had held both wisdom and kindness. It was not just gratitude he felt, it was admiration, respect, and a quiet, growing love that he could not ignore. The night, he would sit outside his small cabin, gazing at the stars and imagining what Aylin's life might be like. He thought about the hardships she must have faced, the prejudice and dangers she had to endure, and the strength she had shown in saving him. He wondered if she thought of him at all, or if the promise he had made that day in the desert was already a distant memory in her mind. Deep down, he hoped it was not. Aylin, too, carried James in her thoughts. Though she had returned to her people and taken on responsibilities within her tribe, she never let herself forget the cowboy who had promised to marry her. She had seen many things in the years since. The struggles of her people, the dangers of the desert, the challenges of living in a world that did not always understand her. But the memory of James remained a source of hope. Whenever she faced danger, she remembered the way he had trusted her, even when he was terrified, and it gave her strength. Her life was not easy. Aylin had to balance the expectations of her tribe with her own desire for freedom and independence. She learned to hunt efficiently, to track animals and people, to heal the sick, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. She became a quiet leader among her people, someone whose courage and intelligence were respected by all. Yet, no matter how busy or important her life became, she often found herself thinking of James, wondering if he was still alive, still strong, and still holding on to the promise he had made. The world around them was changing. Settlers were moving into the lands near Aylin's home, and the desert trails were filled with new dangers. Cattle rustlers, lawless men, and harsh weather tested the skills and resilience of both James and Aylin. James had faced many challenges at the ranch. Harsh winters, sickness among the cattle, and even small disputes with neighboring ranchers. But he faced each trial with the quiet confidence he had gained from years of work and the lessons he had learned in the desert. Aylin, meanwhile, faced her own challenges. She had to navigate a world that often did not understand or accept her. She worked tirelessly to protect her people and preserve the traditions of her tribe, all while learning to survive in an environment that could be unforgiving. She encountered hostility from outsiders, misunderstandings with settlers, and occasional danger from wild animals or treacherous terrain. Yet she remained calm and determined, her mind always focused on the task at hand. Even with all this, both James and Aylin found moments of quiet reflection. James would sometimes pause during his rides to watch the sun set over the horizon, remembering the night he had promised to marry her. He thought about her courage, her wisdom, and her unshakable calm in the face of danger. He realized that the promise he had made was not just words, it was a bond, something that had tied their lives together across time and distance. Aylin, in her own moments of reflection, would sit beneath the shade of a tree or near a quiet stream, thinking about James. She remembered his fear during the ambush, the determination in his eyes, and the sincerity of the promise he had made. Breaths. She wondered how much he had grown, whether he was still the same man she had saved, and if he would ever find his way back to her. The memory of him gave her hope, and that hope carried her through difficult times. As the years continued, life seemed to move in slow, steady rhythms for both of them. James became more skilled, more respected, and more confident in his abilities. He learned to face problems calmly and thoughtfully, drawing on the lessons of experience and the memory of Aylin's courage. Her influence on him, though indirect, had shaped his character in ways he could not fully explain. Aylin also grew stronger, and wiser.
Her reputation as a healer and protector of her people grew, and she became someone others looked to for guidance.
Her life was full of responsibility and challenges, but she carried them with grace and intelligence. Still, her thoughts often wandered back to James, and she sometimes wondered if he was thinking of her as she thought of him. Despite the passage of time, the world had not yet allowed their paths to cross again. They lived in separate worlds, shaped by different cultures, expectations, and experiences. But the bond they had formed in that desert night remained unbroken. Both of them understood that the promise they had made was not something ordinary. It was a connection forged in life-threatening danger, a bond that could survive years of separation and hardship. And so, they lived their lives each day building strength, patience, and resilience. They faced hardships, loneliness, and uncertainty, but the memory of each other gave them courage. It was a quiet, steady hope, like a flame that could not be extinguished by time or distance.
James's work at the ranch brought him into contact with many people, but none could compare to the woman he had saved.
He met other women, engaged in conversations and small friendships, yet he never formed a connection like the one he had with Island. She remained unique in his mind, brave, intelligent, and unforgettable. Island, too, encountered people and formed bonds, but her heart quietly held a place for James. She remembered the way he had trusted her, the sincerity in his eyes, and the promise he had made under the desert sun. That promise became a guiding principle for her life, a reminder that courage, honesty, and loyalty mattered more than anything else.
Their lives were full of moments that tested their strength.
Inspiration. Harsh winters, wild animals, and difficult people challenged them both. Yet every trial they faced strengthened their resilience and reminded them of the promise that connected them. James and Aylin became better, wiser, and more capable because of these challenges, preparing them for the moment when their paths would finally cross again. Time was patient, but the universe had its way of shaping destinies. Though separated, James and Aylin moved through the world carrying the memory of each other and the quiet hope that someday, somehow, the promise would be fulfilled. The distance between them was vast, but the bond formed in that desert night was stronger than miles, years, or circumstances.
In those years apart, both learned the value of patience, loyalty, and courage.
They understood that life was unpredictable, that the world was often harsh and unforgiving, but that true connections could survive despite it all. And though neither of them could see the future, they carried within them a quiet certainty that the story of their lives together was far from over, and that the desert night when they had first met would one day lead to a reunion neither could forget. The memory of Island guided James in small but powerful ways. He became a man who valued bravery not just in others, but in himself. He learned to act with integrity, to keep his word, even when it was difficult, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. Her influence, though indirect, shaped him into someone who could one day live up to the promise he had made. Aylin, meanwhile, became more than a healer and protector. She became a symbol of strength, wisdom, and resilience for her people. The memory of James reminded her that even small acts of courage and kindness could change lives. She carried that lesson with her, using it to guide her decisions and actions in a world that often demanded both patience and bravery. Though the years passed and their lives grew complicated, the memory of the desert night, the arrows, the danger, and the promise remained alive in their hearts. Each of them held on to the hope that one day fate would allow them to meet again, and that the bond formed in that fleeting, life-changing moment would finally be realized. And so, James and Aylin continued their separate journeys, growing stronger, wiser, and more resilient with each passing year. Though the world had kept them apart, the connection between them remained unbroken. It was a bond forged in courage, trust, and a promise that time and distance could not erase. The story of their lives was still being written, and the desert night that had begun it all remained a quiet, guiding light for both of them. Years had passed since James had last seen Island. Time had changed him, as it had changed her, but the memory of that desert night remained vivid in both their hearts. James had grown older, stronger, and wiser. His life on the ranch had shaped him into a respected man among his neighbors. He had faced harsh winters, cattle rustlers, and the unpredictable dangers of the frontier, yet he remained steadfast and determined, holding on to the memory of the woman who had saved him. Each day he would ride across the trails of his ranch, feeling the wind on his face and the weight of responsibility on his shoulders.
Yet even amid the routines and demands of ranch life, he could not shake the thought of Island.
He would sometimes pause on a ridge overlooking the desert and imagine her there, moving with the same confidence and grace that had first saved him. He wondered what she had become, if she had survived all the challenges life had thrown at her, and if she still remembered him as he remembered her. Little did James know that Island had never forgotten him. The years of separation had not weakened her feelings. They had strengthened her resolve. She had grown into a strong and respected woman within her community, known for her wisdom, courage, and skills as a healer and protector. Breath. She had faced countless challenges, from harsh weather to hostility from outsiders, yet she had endured them all. Her thoughts often returned to the cowboy who had promised to marry her, and the memory of that promise had become a guiding light in her life. One day, after months of careful planning and preparation, Aylin made the decision to leave her home and travel to the ranch where James lived. The journey would be long and dangerous, crossing deserts, rivers, and mountains, but she felt a quiet certainty in her heart. The promise they had made years ago could not be broken, and now was the time to see if fate would finally bring them together. She packed lightly, taking only what she needed to survive, and set out with determination. The journey was not easy. Aylin faced scorching heat during the day and freezing temperatures at night. She navigated treacherous trails and avoided dangerous animals. At times, she had to hide from travelers who might not understand her intentions or who could pose a threat. Yet every step she took, every obstacle she overcame, reminded her of the promise and the bond she shared with James. She moved with purpose, guided by courage, skill, and the quiet hope that their reunion was near. Meanwhile, James continued his life at the ranch, unaware that Aylin was on her way. He worked tirelessly, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and helping neighbors in need. He spoke little of the past, but in quiet moments his thoughts often returned to that desert night and the young woman who had saved him. He wondered if she was still alive, if she had survived the challenges of the years, and if their promise would ever be fulfilled. The hope remained alive within him, even as life demanded his attention elsewhere. As days turned into weeks, Aylin finally approached the area near James's ranch. She moved carefully, staying hidden from prying eyes. She wanted to ensure that her arrival would be safe and that she could find James without causing alarm. The familiar trails, the vast stretches of desert, and the distant mountains all reminded her of the land she had once traveled with him. Her heart beat faster with anticipation, and a mixture of excitement and nervousness filled her thoughts. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting golden light across the land, James rode out to inspect the cattle. The wind stirred his hair, and the familiar sounds of the ranch surrounded him. He felt a sense of calm that only the wide-open land could bring. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement near the edge of the trees. At first, he thought it was a deer or another animal, but then he saw a figure moving with purpose and grace. His heart skipped a beat. The figure drew closer, and as she came into view, James's eyes widened in disbelief. It was Aylin. She was older, more confident, and more beautiful than he remembered. Yet every detail, the strength in her posture, the intensity of her gaze, was the same. For a moment, time seemed to stop.
The hardships and the uncertainty faded away.
Here she was, standing before him, real and alive.
James reined in his horse and rode slowly toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. Island? He asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Is it really you? Island nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. It is me, James, she said softly. I have come, as I promised. James could hardly believe it. He dismounted and ran the last few steps to her, embracing her tightly. The years of waiting, the hardships, and the longing all seemed to pour into that single moment. He held her close, feeling the warmth and reality of her presence. I never thought, I never dared to hope that I would see you again, he whispered. Island pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. And yet here we are, she said. I have kept my promise, as you kept yours. We have both survived, and now the world has given us this moment. They walked together back to the ranch, talking quietly as they went. James told her about the years he had spent tending to the land, the challenges he had faced, and the hope that had carried him through. Race. Island shared stories of her own life, the struggles she had endured, and the strength she had found in her people and in herself. Break. Each story deepened their understanding of one another, revealing the ways in which time and distance had shaped them, yet had not broken the bond between them. The ranch, with its wide open fields and familiar trails, became a place of reunion and reflection. James showed Aylin the life he had built, the work he had done, and the respect he had earned from his neighbors. Aylin, in turn, shared the knowledge she had gained, teaching James about the land, the ways of her people, and the wisdom she had learned through experience. Together they realized how much they had grown, both individually and as a pair. Neighbors and friends noticed the change in James. He seemed happier, more at peace, and more focused. There was a quiet joy in his demeanor, a lightness in his step that had been absent for years. Island, too, adapted to the ranch life, moving with grace and intelligence. She respected the routines and responsibilities of the ranch while maintaining her own independence and wisdom. Together, they formed a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared experience. As the days passed, the bond between James and Aylin deepened. They spent hours talking, riding, and working together. Each moment was a reminder of the promise they had made years ago and the journey they had both endured to reach this point. The desert night when they had first met now seemed like a distant memory. Yet it had laid the foundation for the love, respect, and partnership they were building in the present. The reunion was not just a moment of happiness. It was a testament to resilience, loyalty, and courage. Both James and Aylin had faced challenges that could have torn them apart, yet they had survived. Their promise had endured, proving that true bonds could withstand time, distance, and hardship. They realized that their connection was not merely a product of the past, but a living, growing force that would guide them into the future. By the time the sun set over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, James and Aylin sat together outside the cabin, watching the sky turn shades of orange, pink, and purple. There was a peacefulness in the air, a sense that the world had aligned to allow this moment to happen. Neither spoke for a while, simply enjoying the quiet, the presence of one another, and the fulfillment of a promise that had survived the test of time. Breaths. James finally broke the silence. I promised you long ago that I would marry you, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Now that you are here, I want to keep that promise. I have waited for this moment my entire life. Aylin looked at him, her eyes reflecting the same emotion. And I have waited as well, she said softly. The years have been long, but the promise has never left my heart. We have both survived, and now we can begin the next part of our journey together.
The reunion of James and Aylin was more than just a meeting after years of separation.
It was the culmination of courage, perseverance, and unwavering loyalty. Both had grown, learned, and endured hardships that tested their strength, but in the end, their bond had remained unbroken. The promise made under the desert sun had come to life, stronger and more meaningful than either could have imagined. That night, under the stars, they sat together in silence, knowing that their reunion was the beginning of a new chapter. The trials of the past had shaped them, but the future was theirs to build. They had survived, they had kept their promises, and now they had each other, ready to face whatever challenges and joys life would bring. The reunion had come, and now the question was how to live the life they had dreamed of, a life built on courage, loyalty, and love. James and Island stood together on the ranch, feeling the warmth of the sun and the vast openness of the land. For years they had imagined this moment separately, hoping it would come. Now it was real, and the future felt full of possibility. James walked beside Island through the fields, pointing out the work he had done over the years. The fences were strong, the cattle healthy, and the land well tended. "I have kept the ranch running," he said, his voice quiet but full of pride. "I wanted to make sure that when you came back everything was ready for us to start our life together."
Aelin smiled, her eyes bright.
You have done well, James. It is clear that the years have made you strong, not just in body, but in spirit.
I am proud of you. She reached out and took his hand, and for a moment neither spoke.
Words were unnecessary. The connection they had built in the desert and maintained through years of separation was enough to fill that silence. Life together was not without challenges. The world around them had changed over the years. Some neighbors were skeptical of their union, and old prejudices occasionally surfaced. But James and Island faced these challenges together. Their bond was unshakable, and the respect and trust they shared allowed them to navigate difficulties calmly and confidently. They learned to work as a team, relying on each other's strengths and supporting one another in moments of weakness. Island adapted to life on the ranch with remarkable skill. She quickly learned the routines of ranch work, tending to animals, helping with repairs, and managing the small details that kept everything running smoothly. Yet she also brought her own knowledge and perspective, teaching James techniques she had learned from her people for tracking, healing, and managing the land. Together they became more than the sum of their individual skills. They became partners in every sense of the word. In the evenings they would sit outside and watch the sun set over the horizon, just as they had during their first meeting years ago. The beauty of the desert, with its endless skies and golden light, reminded them of the journey that had brought them together. They talked about their past experiences, sharing stories of the hardships they had endured and the lessons they had learned. Each story strengthened their connection and deepened their understanding of one another. James and Aelin also took time to celebrate the small joys of life. They rode together across the open fields, laughed at each other's mistakes, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of being together. These moments were precious because they were earned. They had faced years of uncertainty and danger to reach this point. Every smile, every shared glance, every quiet evening together was a reminder of the promise that had survived the test of time. The community slowly began to accept their union. People saw the respect and care they had for each other, and that made a difference. James had earned a reputation as a fair and reliable man, and Island had demonstrated her strength and wisdom. Together, they became a respected and admired couple, showing that love, courage, and loyalty could overcome prejudice and doubt. Over time, they began to dream of building a home together that reflected both of them, the ruggedness of the ranch and the wisdom and traditions of Aelin's people.
They constructed a cabin near the edge of the fields, a place where they could live, work, and grow together.
The home was simple, yet filled with warmth, laughter, and love. Every detail, from the way the rooms were arranged to the small touches of decoration, reflected their partnership and the journey that had brought them there. Life continued to bring challenges, as it always does. Harsh weather tested the strength of the ranch, illnesses occasionally struck the animals, and the world beyond their property was unpredictable. But James and Island faced these difficulties together, supporting each other and drawing strength from the bond that had survived years of separation. Every challenge they overcame together made their relationship stronger and their love deeper. As time went on, James and Alien also shared their knowledge with others. James taught young cowboys about the land, the cattle, and the responsibilities of ranch life, while Alien taught skills she had learned from her people, tracking, healing, and survival in the harsh desert. They worked side by side, helping their community while strengthening their own bond. Their partnership became an example of trust, respect, and teamwork for everyone around them. Despite the hard work and responsibilities, James and Aylin never lost sight of the personal connection that had brought them together. They took time to reflect on the years they had spent apart and the journey that had finally brought them to this point. The promise they had made in the desert years ago had been tested by time, distance, and danger, yet it had endured. Now fulfilled, it served as a foundation for the life they were building together.
Every anniversary of their first meeting in the desert, they would walk to the same ridge where James had once imagined her presence.
They would watch the sun set over the fields, remembering the night of danger and the promise that had changed their lives. These moments were sacred, a reminder that love and loyalty could survive even the harshest conditions. The life they built together was filled with small but meaningful rituals. They shared meals prepared from the land they tended, told stories around the fire at night, and celebrated each other's strengths and accomplishments. Their home became a place of safety, warmth, and love, not just for themselves, but for anyone who needed help or guidance. Their partnership extended beyond romance. It was a bond that shaped their entire community. As the years passed, their love grew deeper. James never forgot the courage that had first drawn him to Aylin, and Aylin never forgot the gratitude and loyalty that had shaped her view of him. Together, they created a life that was rich not in material wealth, but in experiences, trust, and shared purpose. They faced every challenge with the knowledge that they could rely on each other, and that sense of security strengthened their bond even further. Their story became one that others would tell for years to come, a tale of courage, survival, and the power of promises kept. People spoke of the cowboy and the Apache woman who had been separated by years and distance, yet had been reunited by determination, trust, and love. Their life together became a symbol of hope, showing that even in a harsh and unforgiving world, loyalty and courage could create lasting happiness. James and Island's journey was not perfect, but it was theirs. They had faced dangers, endured hardships, and waited patiently for the day when fate would allow them to be together. Every trial they had faced individually had prepared them for the challenges of life as a couple. And every moment of happiness, no matter how small, was a testament to the endurance of their bond. In the quiet evenings on the ranch, as the stars filled the sky, James would hold Aylin's hand and remember the day she had saved him in the desert. "We made it," he would whisper. "After all these years, we finally made it." Aylin would smile, resting her head against his shoulder. Breaths.
Yes, she would reply softly. We kept our promise.
And now we can live the life we were meant to have together. And so, their life continued, full of work, laughter, love, and shared experiences. They celebrated each day as a gift, knowing how precious it was and how easily it could have been taken away. The promise made years ago had endured time, distance, and uncertainty, and it had led them to a life filled with meaning and joy. Their love became a quiet but powerful force, shaping not only their lives but the lives of those around them. The ranch thrived under their care, their community respected their partnership, and the lessons they had learned from years of survival and perseverance became a source of wisdom for others. Together, they showed that promises, courage, and loyalty could overcome even the most difficult obstacles.
In the end, James and Island lived a life that was simple but full of purpose.
Their days were spent working the land, helping their community, and caring for each other. Their nights were filled with peace, reflection, and the quiet joy of being together. They had endured separation, danger, and uncertainty, yet their love had survived. The promise made in the desert years ago had come true. And as the sun set each evening over the wide-open fields, James and Aylin would sit side by side holding hands, watching the sky turn colors of gold, pink, and purple. They had survived, they had endured, and they had fulfilled a promise that had guided their lives. Their journey, full of courage, hope, and love, had reached a fulfilling and lasting conclusion. A life built together, grounded in trust, respect, and the power of a promise kept.